Tonight on Reporting Scotland. So close and yet so far. The UK and Scottish governments get back round the table to try to reach agreement over Brexit. Millions of pounds have had to be pumped into ScotRail to try to keep it on track. One of the country's busiest needle exchange services has closed after drug-taking materials were found discarded in public areas. The Olympic swimmer trying to make a comeback after drink driving charges got him banned from competition.
It's taken me to sink to, a real low to realise what it is I want through swimming.
Also in the programme, a U-turn by FIFA over poppies. The national football team will be allowed to wear armbands this year and pay tribute to Armistice Day without being fined. Good evening. The UK and Scottish governments say that some progress has been made in the latest round of talks on Brexit, but admit the sides are still far apart. They've been meeting in London to discuss concerns about the EU withdrawal bill. The talks have been described as serious and constructive, and the UK government says it's optimistic a solution can be found. Here's our Westminster correspondent, David Porter.
A damp, grey and overcast Monday morning in Westminster. You could even say it was a bit dreary. The weather reflecting the mood of some as to the state of relations between the UK and Scottish governments over Brexit. Marching down Whitehall, senior Scottish ministers intent on fighting Holyrood's corner.
At the heart of this bill is completely unacceptable because it rewrites devolution, and we can't have that.
Well, he's invited me to a very good restaurant.
Once inside, smiles and the obligatory small talk for the cameras before the real work got underway. Under the UK government's Brexit plans, powers will be returned from Brussels. First, they will go to Westminster, and then it will be decided if they should be sent to the likes of Edinburgh and Cardiff. The Scottish government would prefer a different route, for them to go straight from Brussels to Edinburgh. They say failure to do this could put devolution at risk. After an hour of talks, some progress, but very real differences still exist.
What we've got to make sure is that we protect the devolved settlement. That's what the people of Scotland would expect of me and of my colleagues in the Scottish Government, and that's exactly what we will do. Because the process of withdrawing from the EU should not be used as a means of grabbing powers back to the United Kingdom. It should be a means of entrenching the devolution of responsibility to the Scottish Parliament.
From those who occupy this building all the time, more optimism.
We've got a multilateral meeting with all the devolved administrations next month, but I'll continue the meetings just with the Scottish Government as well, and we're now getting into the nitty-gritty of what needs to be done to enable us to get the best devolution settlement within the overall negotiations with the European Union.
These talks are part of a wider Brexit jigsaw. Separately today, the Prime Minister was meeting the Taoiseach in Downing Street. Meanwhile, the Brexit Secretary David Davis was beginning a fresh round of negotiations with the EU in Brussels. But a recognition in London and Edinburgh that there is much tough talking ahead. Both sides seem to be in for the long haul. David Porter, Reporting Scotland, Westminster.
Well, on a visit to Scotland, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has said that the Brexit transition period must be over before the next general election in 2022. But the Scottish Chambers of Commerce has said business would prefer to have longer to prepare for new trading arrangements. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
So we've put the parasites on board.
They're studying parasites in the life sciences labs at Dundee University. And they want the Chancellor to know that being able to recruit talented students and staff from across the EU is key to their success.
Taking really the best of the research talent, and of course we have undergraduate students who come again from throughout the world, many from the European Union, and we want to allow this free flow of highly skilled people to continue.
The cells change shape.
It should continue for at least a couple of years after we leave the EU in 2019, if ministers like Mr Hammond get the sort of transition deal they're looking for.
As you know, timing is everything in business. And now
A deal that would be welcomed by many of the business leaders the Chancellor met in Dundee.
I think the transition for 2 years is helpful, but from a business perspective, yes, we would actually prefer a longer period to enable us to really develop plans and in some cases put contingency plans in place should we have to develop new business models to trade with Europe.
How long?
You know, 3, 4, 5 years, that's the kind of timeline that business would prefer. But we acknowledge that that may not be possible.
And it seems it will not be possible to extend by much.
Well, I've said in the past somewhere between 2 and 3 years would be good, but I've been very clear that it must end before the next general election. The British people would expect us to get this over and done with before the general election. So something around 2 years is a good place to be.
The idea behind a transition deal where we're formally out of the EU but keep most of the same arrangements is to act as a bridge between life as an EU member state and whatever Brexit brings. The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson thinks the transition can comfortably be completed within 2 years. But the reason others think it will take longer is because the UK and the EU haven't even begun to discuss what life will look like on the other side of Brexit. Glenn Campbell reporting Scotland, Dundee.
The company which operates ScotRail made a multi-million-pound loss over the course of last year. Abellio also borrowed millions from a sister company in the Netherlands while it struggled to deal with delays and cancellations on Scotland's rail network. Well, our business correspondent David Henderson is here. Now, David, this shortfall seems strange when you recall, of course, that Abellio was initially accused of profiteering.
Yes, indeed. 2016, it seems we know it was a difficult year for passengers on ScotRail services. Lots of delays, lots of cancellations, and it would seem a terrible year for Abellio. We found that out today, the Dutch firm in charge of ScotRail. Let's have a look at the numbers. There's a big contrast. Back in 2015, Jackie, Abellio took over the franchise and made over £9 million in profit in the first 9 months they were in charge. £1 million a month in profit. That prompted those critics to accuse them of profiteering. Then this drastic change in fortune coming forward to 2016. This time, a loss of £3.5 million. And it gets worse because Abellio also had to take out a loan from its sister company to the tune of £10 million. And Abellio hasn't transferred any of that money back to the Netherlands last year. So the problems faced by passengers seem to have rebounded onto Abellio.
And will this loss impact on passengers in any way?
Well, short term, it certainly has brought an awful lot of pressure to bear on Abellio because it's forced the company to up its game, and its performance, its punctuality, its popularity have improved recently. It's learnt the hard way about what happens if you fail to meet targets. You lose customers and then you lose millions of pounds. But remember, these delays were not all Abellio's fault, even though they are having to carry the can. It's Network Rail who did that engineering work last year, which led to much of this disruption. And long term, there's a lot at stake here because the UK government wants to reduce the public subsidy for all rail travel, which means rail companies rely increasingly on fares and profits to invest in trains and services for the future. So if they are unpopular and they're losing cash, there's a risk that investment may suffer long term.
David Henderson, our transport correspondent, thank you. Scotland's busiest needle exchange service for drug addicts has been closed. It was based in a branch of Boots the Chemist at Glasgow's Central Station. We've heard a lot recently about the benefits of electric cars and changes to the way we heat our homes. But today, a warning that these changes could also send demand for power soaring. Well, Scottish Power, one of the UK's largest energy suppliers, says they could feel pressure for more onshore wind farms. Here's our business and economy editor, Douglas Fraser.
Europe's biggest wind farm, now complete. More than 200 giant turbines providing enough power on a windy day for all the homes in Glasgow, just to the north of here.
8, 9.
Scottish Power has just pressed the button on its 2,000 megawatt of wind capacity, A recent surge of activity focused on southwest Scotland. Construction has provided many jobs, and by building at scale, costs are steeply down.
For a number of years now, we've been going through an environment where we are reducing the amount of electricity we use. And actually, as we bring electric vehicles onto the system, we will reverse that process and start using more electricity. The worst place we could be in as a country is that you have huge consumer demand and a great willingness to go out and buy electric vehicles, and we don't have the system that can cope with it sitting behind it.
If cars are to go electric within 15 years with rapid battery charging, new cabling is required. To heat homes the green way, in place of gas and oil boilers, entirely new heating systems will be needed. It's reckoned we may demand between 20 and 30% more power, so a lot more turbines.
We do have, rapid change in technology. We're all using more gadgets, more technology around our homes, but more substantively, we're going to have to decarbonise our heat and our transport. We certainly need to see more investment in renewable energy to provide a more sustainable energy system for the future. And it is something that we obviously need to bring the people of Scotland with us on. And I think there's a very positive story to say about the impact of renewable energy on the Scottish economy.
From this room just south of Glasgow, they control all of Scottish Power's wind farms, and that's enough capacity to power more than 1 million homes across Britain. This is paid for through our bills, and there's a lot more change to come. Offshore wind being developed, but also change coming to your heating system and to your street. Douglas Fraser reporting Scotland, Eaglesham Moor.
The interim leader of Scottish Labour, Alex Rowley, has set his party the target of winning the next election here. He was speaking at the party's UK conference in Brighton. Meanwhile, Anas Sarwar, one of the candidates to be the party's next Scottish leader, has criticised the stance of his rival, Richard Leonard, on Brexit. Well, from Brighton, here's our political correspondent, Nick Eardley.
A party increasingly united around this man, an optimistic Jeremy Corbyn can make it to Downing Street. More Scottish seats a central part of the plan, and last night Mr Corbyn rallied Scottish members. Today, the interim Scottish leader set a challenge.
Our aim is to win the next election in Scotland, because let me be absolutely clear. Scotland can make the difference at the next election.
But differences remain in the party. Some were angry there was no vote on staying in the EU single market. So where do the men vying to lead Scottish Labour stand?
I think it's right that we put jobs, trade and workers' rights at the heart of our Brexit strategy. I think it's right that we oppose hard Tory Brexit. I also think it's right that we should be open-minded around the customs union and access and membership of the single market.
And as his campaign struggles amid controversy over the family business, criticism of his rival.
We've triggered Article 50 far too early, and that's why I'm disappointed that Richard Leonard voted with the Tories to trigger Article 50 when we shouldn't have done it.
That's a reference to a Holyrood vote on triggering Article 50. But in the referendum, Mr Leonard backed Remain. Now he has these priorities for Brexit.
Jobs, workers' rights, environmental protection, consumer protection and safeguarding those important Scottish industries.
And on criticism of voting for Article 50.
In 2014 we had an independence referendum where the people of Scotland voted to remain in the UK. In 2016 we had a referendum on our membership of the European Union. The franchise for that was the whole of the UK. So I, as a Democrat, want to respect the outcome of both the 2014 and the 2016 referendum. I don't think it's the place of parliamentarians to block the will of the people.
Tonight, a policy pledge from Mr Leonard too. Earlier we had the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell saying he wants a review of PFI contracts with a view to buying them out. Mr Leonard wants something similar in Scotland with a fund set up to allow the buying out of PFI and successor contracts in Scotland too. Some of the SNP pointing out already tonight that many of those contracts were signed by Labour in power at Holyrood. But just as Mr Corbyn has remodelled this party based in some circumstances on moving on from the past, it appears Mr Leonard's prepared to do that in Scotland where he sees necessary too.
Thank you very much. Nick Eardley there in Brighton. The Commonwealth and Olympic medalist Dan Wallace has spoken for the first time about the drink driving conviction earlier this year, which saw him banned from driving and from competitive swimming. Football's world governing body FIFA is set to lift the ban on displaying the poppy. Well, some more football news for you. Ross County have sacked manager Jim McIntyre and his assistant Billy Dodds following. The element phosphorus is vital to humans. It's needed by every cell in our bodies to promote everything from bones to brains. And that's Reporting Scotland. From all of us for now, goodbye.